Deus Ex is an FPS RPG often labeled one of the original immersive Sims. Games like Prey, Cruelty Squad, System Shock, and more. It was developed alongside the infamous Daikatana at Ion Storm, specifically its office in Austin, Texas, and released in the very first year of the 21st century, 2000. This was a year that contained legendary games like the original Sims, the highly anticipated Diablo 2, Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, and Perfect Dark, the successor of GoldenEye. So how did Deus Ex thrive in this crowded year, coming from a studio that had released nothing but a disappointing flop a month prior? How did it stand out amongst so many titans? One word: conspiracy. Deus Ex is famous thanks to its unique cyberpunk setting interwoven with conspiracy theories and wrapped up in a big blanket of political commentary about the modern world. Well, the modern world of the year 2000. It's a unique setting rare to media in general and unreplicated in video games specifically, with little imitators over the 20 years the franchise has defined PC gaming. I'm actually surprised there hasn't been an Iceberg delving into this franchise yet, but I have nothing against being the first one to do so, since that probably helps the algorithm pretty nicely. Plus, I'd just love to give you guys original content. So today, let's take the Gep gun and question everything on the iceberg for Deus Ex, the greatest PC game of all time. Deus Ex predicted 9/11. Probably the most well-known secret of Deus Ex, if you can call it that. Looking at the New York City skyline in the game, players noticed that the Twin Towers, which at the time of the game's development still existed, were missing. After 9/11, this became an urban legend about the game's prediction of the event, especially because the writers decided to chalk up their absence to a terrorist attack. The actual reason was, of course, that they didn't fit it into the allotted memory of the New York City skybox, so they axed it and made an excuse in the story of why it wasn't there. You know it, I know it, everyone's heard this piece of trivia. Let's move on to more interesting stuff. Cut levels. Deus Ex has a number of cut maps and missions across the series of varying interest. Deus Ex 1 had a number of areas cut from its story, including Mount Weather, a real-life government underground bunker for the president and high-ranking government officials, a level in the White House, a level on a space station, and a separate level on a moon base. All four of these were featured in the design document of the original version of Deus Ex, referred to as Shooter Majestic Revelations. According to Harvey Smith, the moon base was going to originally be the final level of the game, only to be scrapped and replaced by Area 51. A number of textures used in maps of the final game are textures made for the moonbase level, the most obvious being the texture Moonscape 7, which was reused in the Ocean Lab as the seafloor. Deus Ex Human Revolution had Bangalore, India as one of the hub cities, where the Bell Tower HQ would have been located, but this was scrapped instead for the player's second trip to Hangsha, China. Human Revolution also had a level set in Humanity Front's Utah base, which is mentioned in-game by the character Isaiah Sandoval early on. Project Snowblind. Project Snowblind is a 2005 FPS game released by Crystal Dynamics, the studio behind Tomb Raider set in a futuristic China. You play as an augmented agent rebuilt after a severe bombing injury who was tasked to take down the evil general of the enemy cyborg army. Why is it on a Deus Ex list? Well, because Project Snowblind was actually supposed to be one of the ideas for a third Deus Ex, titled Deus Ex Clan Wars, but the idea to tie it in was eventually dropped. Ironically though, likely due to its publishing by Square Enix, who would go on to publish the Eidos prequels, you can see a lot of the Adam Jensen's game's DNA in Snowblind, such as the story setup of an injured agent being given augmentations and a heavier focus on the action elements of Deus Ex. Deus Ex: The Fall. Deus Ex: The Fall is a mobile Deus Ex game released in 2013 that was then ported to PC in 2014. It's set more in the Eidos prequel timeline, where you play as a former member of the Tyrant mercenary group named Ben Saxon. It was intended as the beginning of an episodic Deus Ex series on mobile, but it didn't sell well and was never continued, leaving the plot incomplete. The PC port was also basically a straight port of the mobile version, with little sprucing up, so it was received very poorly and remains the worst rated Deus Ex game in the series. The Nameless mod. The Nameless mod is a popular and famous mod for the original Deus Ex, set in a new conspiratorial, mysterious, and dangerous world. The GameSpy Planet Forums. Wait, what? Yeah, this mod is set in a Tron-style digital world based on the Planet Deus Ex forums that the server provider company GameSpy owned back in the early 2000s. Planets were forums dedicated to specific games or entire game genres, with Planet Deus Ex being dedicated to, of course, obviously, Conker's Bad Fur Day. The Nameless mod is thus full of inside jokes and forum humor, with characters based on moderators and users of the website at the time, as well as the developers of the mod itself. I mean, like, the main character is the lead developer of the mod. If you play it though, you'll probably not understand any of its references or find it even funny, but it's still pretty cool and you should download it if you're interested. The Greys. Despite its major X-Files inspiration, Deus Ex actually has few aliens in it, often just as tiny references in the background that you never see. The only real aliens that show up are the Greys, transgenic monsters engineered by MJ12 and their subsidiary VersaLife from cattle and monkey DNA. They attack the player using a radiation attack and are seemingly able to produce radioactive energy from their bodies. Despite the lore claiming them to be simple animals used as distractions by MJ12, they might be more intelligent or supernatural than we realize. Greys freed by JC in the first game tend to his sanctuary on Liberty Island in Invisible War, and are capable of speech using some sort of telepathy. Also, in a document you can find about the beginnings of MJ12, it describes them as being created to investigate the 1947 Roswell UFO crash, which implies aliens do exist in Deus Ex to a degree. Maybe, as they say, the truth is still out there.
The glory of humanity would henceforward stretch on, through time and space, to the vanishing point of eternity.
Mantis Agents. Mantis Agents were a cut concept from Deus Ex Mankind Divided, with at least one final NPC, Aurelia Smilkovich, being originally one of them. Mantis Agents were designed to be augmented sleeper agents who had been implanted with an experimental neural aug called a Zenith chip, which gave them heightened reflexes, turned off their pain receptors, and could make them perfect secret agents. However, in their sleeper state, these agents suffer from mental illness caused by the chips that can put them into psychotic, dissociative, and otherwise dangerous episodes that make them poor agents. During development, the idea was scrapped and the entire Mantis chip concept was excised from the Deus Ex lore for unknown reasons. We still don't know, to this day, why this was. To me, it sounds like a more realistic version of cyberpunk's cyberpsychosis, with a little less murderous rage and a lot more debilitating depression and realistic mental illness. But it's also improvable if this is what Eidos was considering when they were creating this concept to begin with, and maybe if this was why they scrapped it. Adam Jensen worked for UNATCO. If you're anyways familiar with the games, this is probably a weird idea. How does Jensen work for an organization that doesn't get created until 30 years after his games in the 2020s? Well, in Mankind Divided, Jensen works for a secretive military squad called Task Force 29 following the dissolution of his previous employers, Seraph Industries. Over the course of the game, it becomes apparent that the task force is controlled by the Illuminati, with your boss reporting to Joseph Manderley, JC's boss in the first game and an Illuminati member. In the Deus Ex novel Blacklight, Garvin Quinn, a character you might recognize from the Missing Link DLC, says that TF-29 is a prototype for a larger military organization that will operate across the world without need for jurisdiction on the Illuminati's behalf. This is effectively a foreshadowing of UNATCO and a pretty apt description of them. Thus, Adam Jensen did work for UNATCO in a weird sort of way, as would his successor, J.C. Denton. Black helicopters. The Midnight Sun tabloid carries a story at one point in the first game about a mysterious black helicopter flying around the United States. They interview Manderley about it, who derides the idea as a stupid conspiracy because if it was being used for covert operations, they clearly weren't very good at it. Of course, the irony being that JC himself is flown around by his pilot Jock in, you guessed it, a pitch-black stealth chopper for UNATCO. This gag is based on real conspiracies around black helicopters that go back to 1974, with numerous UFO sighting-style events reported by witnesses in Lancaster County, Nebraska. Witnesses claimed that they saw the helicopters shining spotlights on fields where remains of mutilated farm cattle could be found, and it caused enough stir that the local sheriff and the state police investigated, though they found nothing. Stealth choppers also appear in Invisible War and Human Revolution, being used by both the protagonists and the antagonists to ferry their troops around the world without being seen. Majestic 12. I've been mentioning these guys throughout the video, but now let's get down to brass tacks and explain them. MJ-12, or Majestic 12, are the main antagonists of Deus Ex, an evil secret society who overthrew the Illuminati and seek to build a more direct, aggressive world order over humanity. Their leader, Bob Page, is a pharmaceutical mogul who secretly maintains control over much of the world's governments and industries, using his uncountable resources to build the Helios AI and use it to become a living god. And while it's not one-to-one with the game's version, Majestic 12 is a real theory that was not invented by Ion Storm. Majestic 12's supposed existence was first revealed by a British ufologist named Timothy Good, who claimed he had 1950s-era US Air Force documents discussing a council of men formed by President Truman to study captured alien technology. The thing is, as I mentioned earlier, there is information that reveals MJ-12 in the games was founded after Roswell, so maybe the MJ-12 in the games is closer to the real conspiracy than I give it credit for. Still, the game's MJ-12 is much larger and more sinister, having little to do with aliens overall, and I think one of the only things that really stays to the reference is that their base is Area 51. And as for the real conspiracy, the claims didn't last long, as the knowledge was so weakly evidenced that many other ufologists turned on its biggest proponents, and some believe it was still a disinformation campaign to distract people from secret Air Force projects. FEMA camps. FEMA, or the Federal Emergency Management Agency, is a real-life disaster response organization that responds to natural and man-made disasters. If a crisis is severe enough that FEMA is deployed, their authority overrides other state and local bodies, and has the power to do whatever necessary to ensure disaster relief. Theorists have believed since the 1980s that FEMA would be in control of concentration or internment camps for dissenters and anti-government Americans when quote-unquote shit hit the fan, much like the camps used for Japanese Americans during World War II. By 2052, the year of the first Deus Ex, FEMA has been expanded even further and is headed by Bob Page's henchman Walton Simons. You actually get to infiltrate one of the FEMA camps in Detroit in Human Revolution, where Bell Tower Special Forces and the Tyrants have made base while the site is going unused. Deus Ex 3. Deus Ex 3 was a cancelled plan for a third entry in the series while it was still owned by Ion Storm. It was actually being planned and developed at the same time as another concept for a third entry called Deus Ex Insurrection around 2004 to 2005. Both were eventually cancelled when Eidos shut down Ion Storm in around 2006, but we still know that they existed because of all the design documents. Both projects were prequels to the original game, set, what do you know, in 2027. If you couldn't already tell, a good few elements of these games' stories was kept intact for Human Revolution, Both games also had the Denton brothers' adoptive father be the protagonist. A novel concept, though it was done pretty differently in both versions. In Deus Ex 3, JC's dad was himself a biotech experiment, dumped on a scrap heap and forced to become a slum mercenary on a path of revenge against the company who did this to him. This company might have been VersaLife, or hell, even might have been Tai Young Medical as it showed up in Human Revolution, but we don't know, that's just my personal speculation. Other than that though, we know little else about Deus Ex 3 compared to Insurrection, which I'll discuss later in the Iceberg as there's a lot more details about it.
Historians no longer doubt that an event such as the collapse was necessary for the emergence of our global democratic state. How else would everyone, high and low, have been convinced to embrace communal scrutiny? It's hard to believe, but prior to 2052, humans lived in armed encampments of hundreds of millions of people. Now, after a century of peace, our great cities flourish. Enormous towers command the landscape on every continent. 1 trillion transactions per second. So much inscrutable activity. Yet we are united, at peace, and free. We owe it all to Ophelia, a name we all know. But what is Ophelia? A system? A place? We all know her name, yet our leaders deny that she even exists. Believe, citizens. Believe in the creator of our world. Is it wrong to love a being you cannot see? Such belief is the highest faculty a human being can develop. If you doubt that she exists, just look around. Look at all she has made.
Men in Black. Before the famous movies, Men in Black were considered creepy agents of oppressive power seeking to crush the knowledge of aliens and other paranormal events through intimidation and stalking. It's arguable where they first popped up, as claims of dark-suited men intimidating UFO witnesses go back to the 1940s, but the likely culprit for the popularization of these characters is the Mothman Prophecies by John Keel. Yes, the same book that introduced us to this lovable guy. There were MIBs before Mothman Prophecies, but Keel was the one to really introduce the idea of the Men in Black being creepy hybrids who unsuccessfully tried to pass off as human beings. In Deus Ex, MIBs are thankfully not alien hybrids, but rather special MJ-12 agents that are, oh boy, physio-pharmaceutically augmented. What that means is that instead of mechanical augments or nano-augments, Men in Black are psychologically brainwashed and controlled by special drugs to follow commands. They have robotic voices, pale skin, and red eyes under their sunglasses, further illustrating how unnatural and augmented they have become to serve MJ-12. They are also seemingly a part of a darker, stranger inner circle within the MJ-12, as seen by the Woman in Black Adept 34501 in the Knights Templar Cathedral. In a data cube called Her Testament, she speaks of how Gunther Hermann's mourning for Anna Navarre elicits pity in her, an emotion that will keep her from advancing in her order. Her order is signed at the bottom as the Order of the Night Sky, and when she names the MJ-12, even just talking to herself in her diary, she refers to them as those who rule instead of MJ-12 or anything otherwise. This lore opens up a very weird, strange door into what the inner workings of the MJ-12 look like, as if they're more of a cult than a conventional political conspiracy. It also opens up some unnerving questions into what physio-pharmaceutical augmentation really entails for human beings. Stanton Dowd's claims. Stanton Dowd is a character you meet in Deus Ex, in Hell's Kitchen, and later in the game in multiple areas. Despite his appearance as a homeless bum, he's actually a former head of the Illuminati and a heir of the powerful Dowd family who funded much of the Illuminati's activity. While already intriguing, his dialogue and the information he reveals to JC are incredibly interesting due to their implications. Dowd at one point goes on a diatribe about how the Illuminati really works, being an organization that is created, dies, and is resurrected again throughout the ages by different groups and people. He claims that the first organization that started the first Illuminati was the Order of the Hashashin, the Assassins of Masyaf. No, not those assassins, the real guys that they were based off. Some lore bits also indicate that Daud is the current head of the Templar Order, who survived their destruction in 1312 to become the primary backers of the Illuminati. This tracks with the real order having been financiers for the Crusades and ultimately punished to get the money for the Catholic Church by a scheming pope. Thus, the question remains, how truly ancient is the Illuminati? How long have they ruled mankind from the shadows? And are they more than just some rich plutocratic business club? Joe Green. Joe Green is the senior editor of the Midnight Sun tabloid that details and hints at many of the conspiracies in the original game, and I've mentioned it a few times already for some of these other topics. Despite his critical writings of the government, UNATCO, and the sinister plots of the world, Green has different plans than we actually realize. He is in actuality a spy for UNATCO and by extension the MJ-12, something hinted at by his character bio in the now defunct DeusEx.com, which mentions that people find him suspicious because of how much information he has on hand. Returning to Hell's Kitchen for the first time to meet Stanton Daud, you'll be informed by Harley, a friendly character who's given you information and missions in New York, that Green is a spy and you must kill him. This mission involves pretty interesting mechanics despite being so accessory to the story, like how Green will inform his contacts if you specifically mention Daud in a conversation with him. Doing so, the player will then be shadowed by another NPC who will follow the player covertly through the map until you return to Stanton, which leads to an MJ-12 squad spawning to kill him. It's a cool portrayal of the spycraft in the Deus Ex world, one that is rarely seen in the games that much. And it's interesting that such a unique stalker NPC mechanic is tied to a side quest about a pretty obscure character that you probably don't even recognize even if you've played the first game. H plus cubed. H plus cubed is a strange symbol that pops up at the very last minute of the first CGI trailer of Human Revolution, posted on December 10th, 2010. It also apparently used to be used as a thumbnail for the game on Xbox 360 gamer cards, but I only have written claims of that. Now for the symbol itself, it's actually a cubed variant of the symbol for transhumanism, literally human plus. What the cubed script represents is debatable, as I saw people argue that it was used because Human Revolution is the third Deus Ex game, while others claimed it was supposed to represent even more advanced transhumanism, aka augmentations, or maybe even the coming nano-augs in the game's story. Still, it's an interesting reference you've probably never heard of that has little attention in the wider gamer series, probably because it pops up in a trailer that's 10 years old at the end for a single frame. Rex 84. When Walton Simons activates martial law for MJ-12 to take over the country, a protocol called Rex 84 is activated to allow him to override constitutional rights. It's referenced by the Midnight Sun tabloid as a plan for FEMA to imprison 6 million people they view as dissidents or threats, including the president himself. What you might not know is that this is a real military drill created by General Oliver North in 1984 as a contingency for domestic crises. Yes, that Oliver North. The idea was during something like an invasion of another country or severe rioting, FEMA and the military would be organized under a scenario called Readiness Exercise 1984, where military and law enforcement would corral and imprison activists, dissidents, and protesters. This is also referenced in game and Human Revolution, where a datapad called Rex 84 Operational Field Notes can be found in the FEMA camp you travel to in Detroit. As far as we know today, Rex 84 still exists. Its original master contingency Operation Garden Plot was scrapped, but Homeland Security has been eyeing a replacement plan ever since 9/11 and the department's restructuring. So, yeah, enjoy the rest of your day, and don't think about this too much. Deus Ex Insurrection. The reason Insurrection required a separate entry, honestly, is because there is just so much about it to talk about compared to Deus Ex 3. Stemming mostly from its multiple prototype storylines to the extensive concept art we have of it. In one shop story, the player is a soldier who is rebuilt into a RoboCop super soldier after being caught in the nuclear blast at Area 51 in the first game's finale. To be honest, this sounds a lot like Project Snowblind, which is either the biggest coincidence ever, or developers were passing each other notes in the proverbial classroom. Other plotlines include a very interesting spy game that sounds more like an espionage simulator, where you did real-time covert actions while balancing your character's relationship with his fiancée. I think my favorite idea was the infiltrate the cult concept, which itself had 2 different versions set either after the first game's ending or the second game's. The one set after Invisible War was particularly interesting, with your character being a member of a rural survivalist militia that was actually controlled by the Illuminati. You team up with Paul Denton to stop his brother after he melded with Helios and became a mad techno god. From what we know, there was eventually a final version of Deus Ex Insurrection that was decided upon, in line more with the prequel idea I mentioned earlier, where the player, the foster father of the Denton brothers, tries to salvage extraterrestrial technology in South America for the CIA. Between missions, the player would use a mobile headquarters to build a party of companion characters who would help you in missions, and would have to be managed properly like a CRPG. It also means that there was perhaps a loyalty system, and some party members were double agents you would have to suss out. Really, there was no limit to the cool ideas Ironstorm had for the third game, though we unfortunately never got to see any of them. If it makes you feel better, I suppose Human Revolution was constructed from the elements of these various projects, so maybe we still got some of the original vision in the end. A link to an article about Insurrection is in the description.
Helios will speak. Year of our Union, 125. Our consensus remains clear. Yes, we will prolong this 2nd century of peace. Economic automation is complete. Our research will now encompass other frontiers. Yes, this is the consensus we have created. Our unity will soon be absolute. The remaining boundaries are vanishing. Yes, share your mind with everyone. Open yourself. Your needs are the needs of all. Let us understand and be transformed. Yes. Transform each other and transform yourselves. The only frontier that has ever existed is the self. Helios has spoken.
UNATCO website. Yep, UNATCO exists for real, in real life. Next entry. Alright, fine, I'll explain. UNATCO.org is a defunct marketing website created by Ironstorm back when they created the first game. It's made to look like an actual web page, for the time of the internet at least, of the UNATCO organization. Surprisingly, at least through the Internet Archive, you can read a lot of the website, and yeah, there's a lot of flavor text. There's even links to a jobs board with text talking about the training of UNATCO agents, and a kids page for teaching children about terrorism and stuff. Yeah, that's not fucking creepy looking. There still is an active UNATCO.org that you can access through modern search engines, but it doesn't look like what I just showed you. It looks like this instead. I'm guessing the idea is that Chad Dumier and Silhouette have hacked the site and are trying to red pill the people who see it. You can pause and read it for yourself if you want. If you can't read French, Chad's little sign-off means, "While they sleep, we will win." What's funny is that you can find the Reddit post of the website's owner from 2015, where he asks what he should do with the site, and says he put up a message from Chad in the meanwhile. I guess he couldn't think of anything better to do with it. Shooter Majestic Revelations. I mentioned it before with the cut levels, but Shooter Majestic Revelations had to go much deeper into the iceberg because of how damn complex it was. Shooter was the original concept of Deus Ex, sort of the Oblivion lost to Deus Ex's Stalker, and whoo boy is it complicated. I cannot fit the amount of information, secrets, differences, and design document information with the final game onto this iceberg. This thing has multiple design documents, story outlines, and lists upon lists of levels and augments for JC. It's just impossible to talk about them all. So, let's just talk about a few that caught my eye. For example, JC was originally a customizable character that you could make a man or a woman. This was eventually accomplished with Invisible War and the main character Alex D. There was a level set in war-torn Texas where the Russo-Mexican alliance was invading America. You did not mishear me there, and yes, this alliance is referenced in the final game and in the prequels. Ambrosia was a harmful street drug being manufactured by MJ-12 to kill people, and not an antidote for the Grey Death, which didn't exist in this version. There would have been a level in the Denver International Airport. Yes, the one with all the conspiracies around it, and the giant blue horse statue named Lucifer. The final level was on the aforementioned space station level, which is itself called the Helios. The Helios AI did not exist in this version. Instead, the main AI villain is an entity called Adam. Gunther Hermann is described in the 6.4 design document as being the picture of an Aryan gentleman. I don't think I need to say anything else. There was a retractable claw augment, a voice analyzer that could tell if characters were deceiving you, a gun disguised as a pen, and a whole list of actual spy gadgets that you could use. Of course, this is barely scratching the surface. But to leave you with one more weird detail of Shooter, there was another developed design document titled 5.3e, which had at least over 81 pages, and likely much more that we just don't know. The thing is, a number of pages, including pages 3 through 14, 77 through 80, and any beyond that, are not available to be read by the public. We do have a sizable amount of the design document thanks to a substantial part of it being released to the Deus Ex subreddit a while back. But this 64-page doc is still not even the majority of the design doc. It's really just a description of the campaign and how missions would play out. The remaining elements are being held in collections by the Briscoe Center for American History at UT Austin, and while they eventually released a page 81, there are still many pages missing. Time will tell if they release any more, but for now, I'll just link the Reddit thread in the description that has the ones that were released. Good hunting. Real Deus Ex Augs. Yes, you heard that right, this isn't a joke entry on the list, this is a real thing. Back in 2016, Square Enix and Eidos Montreal teamed up with a prosthetic company called Open Bionics to develop a real prosthetic arm based on the art style of Human Revolution. For clarification, Open Bionics actually makes prosthetic covers for many different brands, including Marvel, Metal Gear Solid, and Alita Battle Angel. Pretty much anything that would thematically make sense as a sci-fi robotic limb or whatever. But it's really just a skin for real functioning prosthetic limbs. One of the Deus Ex arms was eventually given to Tilly Lockey, a British girl who had lost both forearms to a form of meningitis as a baby, who now works with Open Bionics as a spokeswoman. She eventually graduated to the Alita Battle Angel arms as a teenager, but still, Tilly is now a part of Deus Ex history in a nice, heartwarming way. Also, the arms just look cool as hell, and it's really impressive to think that these can be invented in real life, and we're not too far off from them. The Deus Ex Bible. The Deus Ex Bible is, well, interesting. On the nose of it, it's a series of interviews between GameSpy editors and Ion Storm employees like Harvey Smith talking about the game. You're probably wondering, how the hell is that the last entry, beyond real Deus Ex augments, real government plots, and the insanity that is Shooter Majestic Revelations? Well, because I lied. The final entry is not the Deus Ex Bible, though it's still pretty cool and I'm going to link it in the description. No, dear viewer, it's what the rest of the website the Bible is being rehosted on contains. As linked by the Deus Ex Wiki, the Bible is being rehosted on a website called nanoaugur.net. All around, nothing crazy, just some classic early 2000s .net goodness. But then, out of fucking nowhere, right below the Deus Ex Bible, the author reveals a massive transcription of dialogue from the Nameless mod between the main character and two other major characters. And it is insane. The transcript involves main character Trestcon talking to another character named Chris the Cynic, who I believe was based off the mod's writer. He also talks to a Walton Simons reskin who acts as one of the moderators of the Planet Deus Ex forum in the mod's story. And the stuff these two characters talk about is both wacky and very, very meta. Chris talks about Ada, who was Adam's replacement in a subsequent design doc of Deus Ex before she was replaced by Daedalus and Icarus in the first game. Remember that Adam is the AI villain in the original idea for Deus Ex Shooter Majestic Revelations. He talks about the history of the real-life Illuminati, and how the Illuminati rules through another real-life secret society called the Priory of Zion, a strange Catholic secret society, monk, brotherhood, something, that claims that they protect the descendants of Jesus from the public, though they've been supposedly debunked. He talks about Deus Ex lore and secrets from the game in real life, and talks about his opinions about Deus Ex's story. Then he starts talking about the JFK assassination. Walton is even more insane. He starts off by explaining the Deus Ex story and cut content that I talked about earlier in the iceberg. But then he starts talking about how a secret society created by George Washington called the Order of Cincinnatus exists to overthrow America if democracy failed. And it's based on a book you can find in Deus Ex in one place. And it's the Smuggler Hideout from the DLC. And all of this is, again, basically what I've been doing on the iceberg the whole time. What is going on? What is... Oh god, what the fuck?
I now have full access to your systems.
Warning. Critical power safeties have been disengaged. Please vacate the immediate area.
JC! The net's going! The net's going black! JC!
Helios! What's happening?
The safety interlocks for the power generator have been disengaged.
Engage them! Immediately!
I cannot. Our systems are not interfaced with the generator technology. Final safety warning. Functional levels will be exceeded in 3, 2, 1.
The system is going down! All across the globe! I never explained. After the collapse, when the cities are isolated, work will have only started. When the new order begins to self-discipline and do moral philosophy, only then villages, small states, genuine self-rule. Find me, JC. Find me.